Black military history is a rich history, and it's not that well known. It goes back 300 years. Blacks were always brought into military service when there was a need for additional bodies and blood. But when the conflict was over, then blacks were sent back into servitude. But nevertheless, they fought. And every war we've ever been in, blacks stepped forward because it was the one place they could demonstrate equality. They weren't slaves, they weren't being oppressed. They may be in segregated units, and they may not have gotten the same pay or rations or equipment as white soldiers, but nevertheless, they were able to show that they were as brave and courageous as any other group of Americans.
I was appointed by the President as a Deputy Commissioner of the USSR Standing Consultative Commission. And this is a small group of Americans and Soviets who would meet in Geneva, Switzerland, to arbitrate alleged violations of the ABM Treaty.
It's like being born again in that here in this nice, snug, comfortable cockpit, and then all of a sudden you're out there in temperatures well below zero. You got a wind blowing against you of over 300 miles per hour, and you're pretty well protected. But at the same time, you sit there and you wonder, I hope all this stuff works.
The only thing that saved me was the fact I got wounded a day before my unit got chased out, and I had been evacuated from the area. My battalion that I was in ended up by having 5 officers to come out alive at that time. Either they were killed or captured.
In the formation, I'm the last guy to go across the target. First 4 guys went across the target, radio became alive, and everybody's cursing, and you could see the red traces coming back toward us, all along the cliff. It was right on the cliff, right on the edge of the water, with these radar stations on top of this cliff. And as I go right across the top of the target, treetop height, something says, boom! I look up and there's a hole right above my head in the canopy, and fire came up out of the floor right in front of the stick. I ended up about 10 feet off the ground. Scratches, bruises down through the trees.
So you were hanging?
I was still in the chute.
10 feet off the ground.
About 10 feet off the ground. And by the way, I was only kept from hitting the ground because the parachute caught in the tree. 50 feet of 100 feet, German soldier. Ach so, ja, Leutnant. I said, oh, hell, you got it. So they were right there underneath. So that was my introduction to 9 months in Germany as a prisoner of war.
As time goes by, I find no need to cry. Though fate has frowned upon my upturned brow, and happiness has mostly passed me by, I still await the hand of saving grace. For 6 long years, I've sat behind these bars, sometimes too cold, more often, though, too hot. Through window small at night, I watch the stars and wonder why, to me, befell this lot. To cry would seem to say that I am weak. Though 6 long years detained, my strength has rest. And often from here, my fate looks naught but bleak. Still, I must stand and try to meet the test. I'm still a man, and though I'm badly bent, I'll hope and strive until my life is spent.
I remember the first night that we arrived at Da Nang Air Base, we had a rocket attack like an hour after I got there. And being 19 years old, never been in combat before, didn't know much about combat, never even read about it, didn't watch it on television. Didn't have a clue except what I'd been taught for the 2 years that I'd been in the military. And I remember the first night when we had that rocket attack and I just got there, the siren went off and rockets were coming in and everybody had their helmets and their flak jackets and their weapons and they went running. And they were going to a bunker, but I didn't know where the bunker was. So, So I figured, well, I'll just run where everybody else ran. And I followed and found the bunker. But that was probably one of the most interesting nights in my life.
It was a bombing mission up in northern Laos. Once again, mind is a powerful and strange creation. I never once thought that I was going to die. And when we were flying and people were shooting at me, I never thought it was going to hit me. I didn't do anything. I mean, I would take whatever maneuvers necessary to die. But it was almost like a game. And my mind just shut it out. I mean, it was literally no conscious fear. I have been on the ground near the end of my second tour, coming into my last month. I began to think about getting home.
When I crashed in the jungle on Martai, and was in the jungle for 2 days, and everything in the jungle has thorns. It tore up my legs, and when I got rescued by one of our patrols that was out looking for me, they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to stay at home until somebody found the crash so they could know where to go. But he said he couldn't sit there on his duff while 2 men were out in the jungle, and he had a patrol available. So they went out a day early, and I walked into their patrol on the second day that I was out. And they took me to base hospital. On one of the PT boats of a fellow by the name of John F. Kennedy was a lieutenant in charge of PT boat squadron 109.
Some of the fellows who requested the Red Tail to escort them over Berlin were the same fellows who didn't want black fighters escort in the first place. But they had done so well with them until they said, hey, we got to get those Red Tails to go with us on this first flight.
Why were you dubbed Red Tails?
Because the tails were painted red and the nose of the plane was painted red. And because of that red tail, that whole back of the plane painted red, you could see this just like that. And many pilots who saw the red tails and the B-24s didn't know that they were black flying them. I think in one case, wherein a group of pilots came to the camp one day, they had been in trouble and the red tail got them out of trouble. So they came, after they went to that base, they came up, said, we're looking for the red tails. And we are the red, you are the red tail, but you're black. Yes, we are the red tails. And the attitude changed.
We carried 8 rafts to storm the tour. We lost 6 of the rafts. Only had 2 rafts. And once Agnew got ashore and got a line over, and the second raft, I told him, I said, you know, let's go, because ice was forming on all our bodies and everything, and every time a wave would come and wash 15 or 20 people off. The ship had broken in half, and the after part had drifted off and sunk, and everybody was up on the bow part, and we were standing there, the other 3 blacks, and I told them, I said, we're gonna die. They said, well, that's Iceland, they'll probably lynch us if we go ashore. I said, well, at least we can die fighting. I said, let's go.
So I knocked on the door, and I'm getting my spiel together to say, Seaman Radioman Patton, 405-979, reporting. So he opens the door, and I said, Seaman Radioman, and he slams the door. I never even got the rest of it out.
It's been a tradition in my family. We've all fought and sacrificed. And yet I went to Vietnam thinking I had something to prove. Now, if I felt that way, can you imagine what a person that's just, you know, a young kid, 17, 18 years old, right out of high school? I mean, I felt like I had to prove that blacks could fight, that blacks were tough enough, smart enough to be able to lead men into combat. We've been doing it since the beginning of time. I didn't have anything to prove.
I said, listen, let me tell you something. When I took over this squadron, it was number one. This squadron was uptight. Now the squadron is going downhill. You guys are not doing your job. I said, if you're trying to run me out of maintenance and off the flight line, you're not going to do it. Because I'm going to run this squadron even if I run it into the goddamn ground. Now, if you want to stay here, be on my team, let me know. Otherwise, I'll find you another place to go. All of them said, we want to stay. We want to make it work.
We went into Vietnam with all the right reason. Our fear of communist exploitation and what was then identified as a domino effect in Asia. Well, 50,000 troops later, we still think, what's going on? This is not changing. And you got an endless flow of troops out of China, who at that time was a kingmaker and still is today, and who's a part of the National Security Council on what they will not support. And through a restraint of a lot of people who did not want this to escalate to a nuclear event between China and the U.S. and Russia, we needed to get out of Vietnam. And I think those voices of discontent about staying there had an influence on the government, which is about the way a democracy is supposed to work. The people speak, and the government can get into a war, but it's the people that force them out.